Hello my friends, and a very warm welcome back to my painting channel. And in this video we're going to be painting this amazingly great looking Games Workshop miniature of the Witch King of Angmar from the Middle-earth strategy battle game. That is a lot to say. We're going to be painting him both on foot and mounted. So we're going to do a little bit of painting of the Witch King himself, and we're also going to do a little bit of the horse. Now, to make this a little bit different, I'm also going to paint the horse differently to the video where I've shown you guys how I paint horses, just to give you a little bit of variety. So first things first, we're going to start with Dark Rust 302, one of my favourite colours. So if you've watched the channel and you're familiar with my painting, you'll know that this is a great base tone to build up a lot of different browns from. And what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to use this in a nice thin layer, and I'm just going to cover all of the horse and all of the leather straps that go with the horse as well. So I'm just going to paint all around the horse area on the mounted version of the Witch King, and I'm not going to be too careful or too precious about where I place this. I'm just going to try to cover all of the horse and all of those leather straps and all of those little bits as best I can. Now, Dark Rust 302 is a great paint because it does take to the miniature quite well, and it does have a really good sort of thick pigmentation as well, which means that this is a great colour to go straight onto your miniature in sort of one or two coats, which is fantastic because it doesn't mean you need to spend ages building up those layers and building up those textures. As always, I would always recommend you to use a little bit of water with your paints as well, just to make them run onto the miniature a little bit smoother, and just to make sure that while you're painting then the paint does dry in a nice even fashion. Now from there, I'm going to use Tenebrous Grey from the AK Interactive range, and if you don't have this paint, what I would normally say to people is, if you don't have this paint, it doesn't matter too much, you can always just use a normal flat black from Vallejo. The black paint from Vallejo is fantastic, but I use the Tenebrous Grey purely because it takes to the miniature in a really nice, quick and easy fashion, and it's also a slightly off black colour as well. It's a slightly off tone, so it is very, very dark grey, but it's not quite black, so it doesn't take away all of the detail and things like that. It does allow us to build up from. So as you can see, I'm just painting this all across the Witch King's cloak and all of the areas of the Witch King that you would normally expect to be black. Now I put a little picture-in-picture just across the top as well, showing you me doing the same thing with the version of the Witch King on foot, as well as the mounted version as well. So just trying to cover all of those areas that we would expect to be black, so all of those cloaks all around the face, all of those sorts of areas here with this character. This is quite an interesting character to paint because you'd kind of automatically assume, wearing sort of black and things like that, that it would be devoid of colour or character or anything like that. But we are going to build those up, and we're going to build those colours up slightly. We're not going to go too extreme and turn him grey, but we are going to build those colours up a little. Now from there, what I'm going to use is a gunmetal colour. So this is Vallejo's version of Lead Belcher from Citadel. You could use either or, both colours would work fantastically well. And pretty much that's all I'm going to do, is cover all of the armoured points, all of the areas that would be silver. So this is going to include things like the boots, the greaves, his wrist guards, his gloves, and also his helmet and things like that. I'm also going to spend a little bit of time to paint the shoes on the horse, and also the little ringlets, the little steel ringlets that are connecting all of the leather parts together. Now, although we're just doing the base coats at the moment, it is worth painting those little details as well, because when we do use the wash, it is going to tie those colours together and make those colours look a little bit more natural and like they're supposed to be together. So the wash is almost like our quick fix at getting things to look the certain way that we want and tie those colours in quite nicely. So we're just going to paint across, as I said, the greaves and the gauntlets. That's the word I was looking for earlier, not just the gloves. The helm and his crown, and also those little steel ringlets just around the leathers as well. As you can see, I'm just trying to take a little bit of time on the horse just to get those right. The good thing we're doing this as base colours is it doesn't matter if you do make slight mistakes, because it is something that is quite easy and quite simple to fix as well. So don't worry too much if you make one or two mistakes here. This is just the base colour, so you can always go back and paint the original colour that it's supposed to be. So you could paint the brown back if you get a little bit of silver on the brown and things like that. That makes the base coating of the miniatures really, really sort of stress-free and easygoing and sort of fun to do, because you kind of got this free reign of just getting all of these colours together and just kind of building your palette and building yourself a nice idea as to how it will look. Now once that's done, I'm just going to use a small amount of heavy red from Vallejo, and this is just going to be painted just in the mouth. So we're going to paint the tongue, and I'm also going to paint the eyes using this colour as well, because these sort of nasty riders, horses, do have really sort of red eyes. They have these piercing demonic eyes as well. So yeah, we're just going to paint the tongue, and we're also going to paint the eyes using the same colour. Now something to bear in mind as well is someone did ask me before if I have primed my models, and I do prime my models, and I tend to prime my models using grey primer. So I use a grey primer because it's a happy medium for myself. It's not too dark that you've got to build up from black, but it's also not too light like white, where it allows the colour to become too vibrant when you paint. It just seems to be that happy medium for me. Now once that is dry, the reds, so the tongue and the eyes and things like that, I'm then going to use a small amount of bone white, and I'm going to paint this just in places like the teeth, just like so. This is a little difficult to catch on camera because of where they're situated. I'm just going to paint a little bit of this bone white just in the teeth area here, and this is just going to build a little bit of the character around the horse's mouth. Now once that's dry, we're going to use Null Oil from Citadel. You can use any black wash if you don't use Citadel washes, which I'm pretty sure most people do. You can just use sort of like a Vallejo black colour or anything along those lines, sort of like a dark tone or anything like that. But for this one, I'm using Null Oil, and that's all I'm going to do is just cover the whole miniature with this. So this is going to make the painting nice and simple, and we're going to build those colours and build those tones up from there. This is going to work really well with that tenebrous grey, because by using that tenebrous grey, which wasn't quite set black, this means now when we're using a black wash, this is going to allow the wash to sit in those little folds and those cloth recesses and just give it that little bit of extra depth as well. So we're just trying to cover the whole miniature in one nice even coat, trying to make sure that this doesn't pool too much in any areas, because if it gets too much, if it pools too much in one area, then you will lose a lot of detail. Now once that is dry, I'm going to use a small amount of strong tone from the Army Painter. Alternatively, you could use an Agrax Earthshade. These are very similar paints, so they are a very dark brown sort of colour. And pretty much what I'm going to do with this is I'm just going to place this across the metal points. And the reason why I'm covering this in two different washes is because we're using the black wash just to tie everything down and tie those colours together and to darken everything up. But once everything is dark as well, we're going to add this wash to just gain a little bit of colour and a little bit of tone. So why I'm using this dark sort of brown colour, this sort of earth shade, this sort of strong tone, is just to give it this sort of rusted, sort of beaten and worn feel on the metals. And the reason for that is because not everything looks perfect, not everything looks brand new and silver and great and everything like that. So we just add in this little bit of a sort of earthy tone to the metals, just to sort of make them look a little bit more worn, a little bit more old, because these sort of demonic riders from the Lord of the Rings, they have been around for quite a while. And once all of that is dry, what we're going to do is we're going to move on and use a dark blue grey and the tenebrous grey. So I'm going to mix half and half of each of these. So this is just one blob of each. So that's 50-50 in my book. So that's just, like I say, a direct half and half. So one part each. And that's all we're going to do is using the very tip of our size 0 brush, which is our nice detail brush. We're just going to use the very tip of the brush to just sketch out and just paint around all of these sort of raised areas and all of these sort of raised parts of the sort of folds in this dynamic pose. So whereas we've got all this cloth just flowing off the miniature, we're now going to pick out on all of the areas that are higher up and all of those raised areas on the folds, leaving all of that darker shade sitting just in those recesses, just in those folded areas, as you can see. And we're just going to slowly, gently build this up. Now it's always important to make sure that your paint is nice and thin. That will allow you to move and manipulate the paint onto the miniature in a nice, smooth, even fashion, but it is also going to allow the paint to just dry down in a really nice, smooth transition onto the model as well. This is going to avoid then having any really sort of big blobs and really sort of garish areas on the model. Instead, this is going to become a very nice, smooth, sort of subtle lightening, and it's going to dry down into this really lovely contrast in transition that's going to look very pleasing to the eye. There's nothing worse than putting loads and loads of heavy paint onto your miniature and then sort of not having that nice smooth transition. So just add a little bit of water each time you mix your paints and each time you add your paints into your sort of palette, and just add a little bit of water with it and let it flow smoothly onto the model. Now once that bit is dry, we're just going to use the dark blue-grey on its own, and as you can see then, I'm just going to gently, slowly build this up just across then the very, very raised edges, so the very, very tips of those areas. So just showing you on the unmounted version here as well, just how I'm just sketching this down, those raised points, as you can see. And again, using a little bit of that water within the paint, you can see how smooth that paint is just taken straight off the brush onto the miniature in a really, really lovely, easy fashion. And again, that's all we're doing, is we're just picking out all of those sort of raised areas, picking out all of those points that are just standing out off the model as well, just like so. So once that is dry, we're then going to move back onto the gunmetal that we've used previously. So this was the colour that we based all of our metal areas, and what we're going to do is we're going to use a very, very fine, small dry brush, because we don't want to get this on any of the other parts of the model. And what we're going to make sure is we're going to make sure that there's very little to almost no paint on this brush, and we're going to use this in a very, very gentle fashion, and we're gently going to dry brush those silver areas back up. And the reason why we're going to use this in such a small way, or we're going to make sure that there's almost no paint on the brush, is because by dry brushing this way, that's all we want this to do, is to very, very lightly pick out on the very, very raised edges of the model. And we're doing that on purpose so that we just get this nice light highlighting tone from those silvers and from those metallics. Now once that area is dry, we're going to go back to the Dark Rust 302, and then we're going to make our way onto painting the horse. Now by painting the horse, we're just going to use, again, a nice thin down paint using a little bit of water, and we're gently going to start to build this dark rust colour back into all of those raised areas, all of the muscle areas and all of the muscle tones that we've got on the horse. Now if you've watched my other video on how I paint horses, you'll have an idea as to how I pick out and how I sort of work the little bits of fur and using the stippling effect and some of the brush strokes to really get to grips with the details and make my own details on these horses and build up a lot of character and colour as well. So that's all we're doing, is exactly the same thing, but we're just going back to using that really dark colour, that really dark tone, so that this builds and gives us a really nice platform to build up some of those highlights from. So as you can see, just using the tip of the brush, I'm starting to build up using those brush strokes just to get that highlight in and just build that colour back. Now once that's done, we're going to use that Dark Rust 302, and we're also going to mix a little bit of this flat brown as well. And what we're going to do is I'm just going to use half and half. So as I like to do, in a half stop, so this makes it really, really simple and easy to follow and an easy way to build up, I'm going to use one blob of each. So that's one part of flat brown, one part of Dark Rust. And again, I'm adding water into this so that this becomes a little bit thinner, a little bit easier to work with, and a little bit easier to manipulate, and it moves onto the miniature in a really nice fashion. And once again, using the tip of the brush, you can see I'm using a mixture of those little sharp strokes and a few of those little sort of stippling effects just to build the kind of texture and build an almost fur-like or sort of hair-like texture as we go. Now this colour is just slightly lighter than the dark rust that we used originally, and this is going to start to boost a real nice vibrant tone. This is going to give us a kind of light reddy colour. It's not going to do this straight away because we're going up in those stops, in those increments, but it's going to give us that ability right from the off just to add this nice thin sort of reddy colour, and you can already see that this is having an effect. Now don't forget, when you paint, the paints do start out lighter and then they will dry down a little darker as well, so don't be too worried if it looks a little bit too bright to begin with, because it will darken back down. As you can see, I'm just following all of those raised areas like we did with the cloak just across the horse. So I'm following all of the muscle tone, the muscle texture and all of that definition just around the legs, across the neck, all of those areas, and we're just picking out those raised bits while we keep that black wash sat just in those recessed points, and that's giving us that really nice contrast, creating a really dark effect, a really dark looking horse, and that's exactly what we're looking for. And you can go over this and do this in multiple layers if you want, so that builds up a little bit more vibrance for you as well. Once that's dry, then we're just going to use the flat brown on its own, and again this time we're going to make sure that we've got plenty of water with this, just so that this becomes nice and smooth. If you add a little bit too much of paint onto your miniature, as you could see there, I was just using a nice sort of damp brush just to manipulate and move a little bit of that paint around so that it doesn't then overdo or pool in too much of an area. And as you can see, just using the tip of the brush again, using the same technique that I've done on the previous horse video and on the previous layer to this one, we're just picking out those areas, and you can really see that vibrance, that sort of character and that color now really starting to pop. It's really starting to build up now, and there we go. And what I'm trying to do here is I'm just trying to paint this on the higher areas. So we're painting this on the areas where we think the light is going to catch. So we're not going to paint this reddy, lighter color, this lighter tone on the underneath, on the belly of the horse. We're not going to do that, because then the horse would look too flat. Instead, we're just going to pick out some of the areas of the muscle that are poking out that we think the light would be catching on, so that this then creates that contrast between the lighter areas and the darker areas, giving us this real nice control and this real nice sort of character and glow to the horse. The reason why I opted to paint the horse in a nice dark sort of brown colour rather than using it in a black tone was purely because I wanted to make the horse look a little different from the rider. Because the rider is so dark and he's wearing black and he's wearing greys, I didn't want to paint the horse black as well and then end up losing the horse and the rider into one. It was all about trying to create a dark horse but at the same time make it different. So once that's done, we're going to use a few different things. So we're going to go back onto the leathers, and for the leathers on this one, I'm going to use the dark rust like we've done previously, but we're also going to use leather brown as well from Vallejo, and we're going to use 1 and 1. So again, 50-50, this is one blob of each, and that's all we're going to do is using the very tip of this size 0 brush again. We're going to gently just drag this across some of those areas, and using the stippling effect that we have done previously on this model and other models, we're just going to dab this across the miniature and dab this across the model, so that this creates a worn out, battered, sort of beaten looking effect, this beaten kind of leather effect on there as well, just like so. There we go, just like so. So we're trying to pick out those areas, and we're just trying to pick out bits. Doesn't matter if we leave in a little bit of that dark tone just in the middle areas, in the grooves of the leather, because again, that's creating that texture, that tone, and that depth and definition as well. And once that's dry, then we're just going to use the leather brown on its own, and this is going to be our highlighting tone. And by doing this, we're going to use the very, very edge of the brush and being very careful with this one. Again, we're going to stipple this, but we're going to use this stippling either side, so just across the top and the bottom of the leather, as you can see. And I'm also just going to gently drag the very tip of the brush as well to create little scratches and little sort of breaks in the leather. Again, just creating this worn out, this beaten, this battered effect in this really quick, easy way, and it's going to look fantastic. And again, by using this different colour, this will allow the leathers to really stand off the miniature as well. So the leathers are going to look like a completely different tone to the horse's colour. And again, just by using these leathers, instead of doing them black and losing them to the miniature and losing them into the sort of the same colour as the Witch King himself, we're making these just a little bit different so they stand out slightly, and it creates a little bit of character and a little bit of definition to it as well. It means these areas and these parts of the miniature are really going to pop and stand out and look completely different on the board, and that's what we're looking for. And once that's done, I'm just going to go to bloody red. As you'll know, this is one of my favourite colours, partly because of the name and partly because it is a really lovely, vibrant red colour. And now we're just going to pick out that very tip of the tongue sticking out of the horse's mouth. And I love this little bit of character with the tongue poking out. This gives us something to really boost a bit of vibrancy onto the miniature as well. And we're going to paint the eyes using the same colour as well. And I love this because we've got such a dark miniature, something dark greys, blacks, dark browns for the horse, and then we've got these really vibrant, piercing red eyes that makes it look so evil and so dark as well. And I think that's fantastic. And then finally, I'm going to use a blackout brown, purely just to do something a little bit different in terms of colour. You can use any colour that you like. You can keep it black, you can do whichever. But pretty much I'm using this blackout brown, and I'm just going to use a very, very light dry brush across the tail. And again, the reason why I'm using this colour is purely because it's different. I wanted to create a little bit of a different tone across the tail so that it doesn't tie into the miniature. So again, it's just about creating these little pockets of colour and these little areas that stick out and stand out and look different on the model, so that it means the model isn't all just one clump of black paint. It creates more than just that one shade, and that's all we're doing. And all in all, that is the Witch King done. By following these instructions, or if you follow along and paint along with me, you should look something like this. You'll have to let me know in the comments below what you think of my techniques and what you think of the way that he's turned out. Personally, I think he looks fantastic. It's actually quite a simple miniature to paint. He's quite a simple model to paint because he's mostly just black, greys, and silvers and things like that. You know, you can get away with just covering him in a wash and he's pretty much done. So yeah, let me know what you think. I always love hearing from you guys. Thank you so much for tuning in as always. All your positivity, your comments, your likes, your shares, everything. It means the world to me. And I really do appreciate it. Take care of yourselves, my friends, and I will see you guys very, very soon on the next one, because this is part 1 of 3 different models that I've got coming up this week. So hopefully I'll see you guys on the next one. Take care.